Todd O'Connor. I'm a senior SCM engineer with Adobe, and today I'd like to talk to you a little bit about what we do and what we've learned in managing GitHub at scale. To be clear, this is GitHub Enterprise, so I'm pretty sure everyone's going to be familiar with that rather than github.com. So a couple slides briefly on what Adobe's up to these days. I've been with the company over 10 years, and I know when I first started, it was all about shrink wrap apps. In the Bay Area, you'd go down to Fry's, you'd have your big shelf full of nice, shiny Adobe apps and boxes about that big as well. Well, now it's all about digital. It's about streaming the big games to your devices. It's about online ad campaigns. It's about analytics. It's about document e-signing and the whole gamut and so much more than just content creation. Adobe's really branched out into digital. Here's a little information on what the company looks like these days. The company was founded in 1982. One of the points I'd like to draw your attention to keep in mind for later on in the slides, we'll have a tie-in, is in the upper left, the number of employees. About 15,000 employees worldwide, 41 different countries. We'll see how that ties in a little bit later on. Adobe Acquisitions through the years. As many companies do, they grow through acquisition. Three that I'd like to point out for us that were major events was 2002, Excelio. That was our document services, the document cloud. In 2005, Macromedia. You probably all have heard of this little application called Flash. So that was Macromedia. 2009, Omniture. This was a huge leap for Adobe. Expanded our business focus and really moved us from content creation into marketing and analytics. And that is one of the fastest growing business units that we have at the company right now, is the online marketing and the analytics. So GitHub through the years. What I'd like to talk about today is some of the things that we do to help out three segments of our user base at Adobe. I want to show what we do to help out the users. I want to show what we do to help out the managers, and I want to show what we do to help out myself, the site admin. This is one of my favorite quotes, and one of the ones I use with my Boy Scouts. They kind of scratch their head like, Mr. O'Connor, what does that mean? Experience is what you get when you don't get what you wanted. Maybe in GitHub terminology, the angry unicorn is what you get when you don't get what you wanted. The angry unicorn is not my friend. We had a lot of experience. We got a lot of experience in the early days with GitHub Enterprise. Server sizing, processes being killed, and we don't know why. Disks filling up, and why did the disk fill up? We got a lot of experience. So back in the early days, what did our server look like? Well, we started almost 4.5 years ago. Proof of concept team, 15 users. Version, very, very, very early version of GitHub Enterprise. I actually had to submit a support case to say, hey guys, do you remember what version of Enterprise I was on 4.5 years ago? And they kind of had to scratch their head as well and look back through the support cases, and they said, this is probably the version that you were using. Very, very early version. Here are some of the server specs. Remember earlier I mentioned that experience. I think I was actually being generous when I spec'd out the server for the slide here. We had frequent events, adding more RAM, adding more CPU, adding more disk space. Those are all frequent events for us. So what does GitHub look like today? Today, GitHub just works. I talked to a lot of folks yesterday, and I talked to a lot of folks at the conference today, and I'm asking them, what do you guys do for your GitHub Enterprise monitoring? What do you do for this, or what do you do for that? And they're like, we don't do anything. We just turn it on, and GitHub just works. So I've heard those three words a lot over the last couple days, GitHub just works. But I know you guys are a technical crowd. You want specifics. So here, today, by the numbers, is what our server looks like. 4.5 years later, widely adopted across the entire company. We have 43,000 plus repos, over 1,100 orgs. The server specs you can see there, single VM still, 16 CPU, 160 gig RAM, 160 gig root drive. The root drive is an important one to make really big because really of the capacity that you have allocated, you only have half of that available to the VM. The other half is kept virtual for when you do an upgrade. the upgrade process wants to use that virtual disk for its stuff. So if you only allocate a 40 gig drive, you only have 20 gig usable experience. 6 terabytes of SSD storage. We have a replica server, same specs. We have a stage server, same specs. Highly, highly recommended to have a staging environment that mirrors what your primary production environment looks like, so you can test your upgrades, so you can test webhooks, or whatever invasive things that you want to try. Try that on your stage environment first. Our landscape also includes a backup server. Simple Linux VM, lots of storage. You want to be able to have it close to your primary so the backups are fast, and you want to keep a lot of backups. Some folks have asked me earlier today, it's like, well, how long do your backups take? Or, our backups take, X amount of hours. What about your backups? Well, I do my backups often, and I do them frequently. So that way the deltas are very small. So I'll do a backup like maybe 6, 8, 10 times a day. So we churn through it really, really quickly. The backups are small. I'll have a lot available at my fingertips in case I need it. So, talking about those 3 points, users, managers, and admins. Let's talk about the self-service portal. This is something that we put together to help our user base, help them do common routines, maybe some difficult routines. But more importantly, it's not a wrapper around GitHub Enterprise. We built the self-service portal as a complement to GitHub Enterprise. We built some services and have these options available for users for those difficult things or things that we want to hide from them. So here's the challenge and some of the questions that we answered, or the problems that we wanted to address when we built the self-service portal. Right? Any user at Adobe can use GitHub Enterprise. This is especially helpful for our returning summer interns. Many of our interns return from year to year. They come back, their account is still in GitHub Enterprise. Their repos are still there. They can still have access to their data. This is really great. GitHub Enterprise at Adobe, completely self-service. Users log in, users create their orgs, users create their teams, and users create their repos. The org owners are responsible for their access management. It's completely self-service. Anybody at the company can use it. Our generic users, sometimes you might call them your bots, your service accounts, your role-based accounts, your build accounts, your automation accounts. Your generic users have difficulty, or at least ours did, with logging into the browser because of our two-factor authentication. The generic accounts don't have a PIN plus OTP, they just have a regular password. So we had to build a solution for that for our end users that manage generic accounts. Users need to set up integrations. Jenkins, Fisheye, whatever integrations they want to set up. Some of these integrations have secret keys involved. I don't want to just hand off my secret keys and say, here, please don't share this or post it on your Facebook account, right? So we wanted to hide that behind the scenes and give them a one-button push, set it up for them, make it really simple. And then a self-service report. We have all of these users that are setting up orgs. We have all of the, they're creating a bunch of repos. They're creating a bunch of teams. They don't know what the breakdown is of access control for that. So we want to give them the capability to, for this org, show me all the teams, show me all the members of the teams, show me the access levels of those teams, and show me what those teams have access to repo-wise. So it's a nice report, and those folks can use that report for, maybe an audit, internal audit of their own or something like that. So it really makes it simple. We just use a series of API calls to do that. I've submitted a case with GitHub with support for an RFE, so hopefully maybe in a future release, this would be built into the product. They could just push a button within Enterprise and boom, this report comes out in a PDF format or whatever. Techniques. So to keep our licensing counts manageable and cost manageable, we auto-suspend people. We have a little cron job that runs and an account and a utility that goes out there and checks all of the accounts across GitHub Enterprise. And certainly we want to suspend those folks that have left the company, right? They don't need access anymore, suspend them. We also suspend folks that are not active in a certain time period. Enterprise has a built-in dormant report, but their default is 30 days. We give our users a little bit more time than that, but we want to still suspend them. Maybe they logged in once, never going to use the product again. Let's reclaim that license. Let's reclaim those costs and auto-suspend the account. We leverage the custom sign-in and suspended messages. This has been a really, really big win for us, and I want to give a big shout out to GitHub for implementing this feature. Thank you very much. When these accounts are suspended and they try to log back into Enterprise, they'll see our nice little custom message. Sorry, user, you've been suspended. Go to this address and you can unsuspend yourself, our self-service portal. Before that, before we had this custom sign-in message, this suspend message, I was answering probably several emails per day. Todd, my account's suspended. Yes, I know. This is what you need to do, right? Now this is great. I can focus on other things, and the tool can handle this for the users. So thank you, GitHub, for this feature. Again, the self-service portal can help with the integrations. Setting up that Jenkins or the Jira or the fisheye with that special secret key that they don't need to know about. All right, self-service portal, what does it look like? I can't give you a full-blown demo, but when you log into the self-service portal and you drill down into the GitHub option, as a user, you are presented right now with 3 options. You can suspend or unsuspend your account, and in this case, you can enable fisheye, or you can manage any of the generic accounts that you're an owner for, identified as an owner for in our LDAP system. So you might be thinking, perish the thought, Todd, why do you want to suspend your account, right? Aren't we all wanting to use GitHub? Well, maybe it's a good use case. Person's going to go on vacation, they're going to go on sabbatical, they're not be at the company for a while, so they can suspend their account. They can be proactive and suspend their account while they're out. We mainly use it for testing purposes. So I'll suspend my account, try some stuff, make sure our processes are still working, unsuspend my account. So 99% of the actions for that button are unsuspend actions. We have very few people that we know that actually suspend. All right. So now let's take a look at a little bit more detail here on the fisheye integration. So if I were to log in, behind the scenes, we discover what repos I'm an owner for. I might be my own personal repos, or I might be an org owner so that I have access to all the repos within that org. So we present the user with all of the repos that they're an owner for, and maybe the organization, or maybe if it's my personal account, that's the owner column. And in this case, we have 2 examples. We have the first one that's not enabled. We've got a blue button. You can add to fisheye. Or the second one is highlighted yellow. That's already enabled. Maybe they don't need it anymore. They can click the button, and they can remove that integration. Pretty simple. Really easy, 1 button push. We handle all the heavy lifting behind the scenes and take care of keeping all the secret keys secret. Managing generic accounts. A lot of our teams have build automation, as many of you probably do as well. You don't want to embed your credentials into the build system, so you have a generic account to do that. Well, now you need to manage that account, and that account needs to log into GitHub, but that account has difficulty logging into GitHub. So what do? We have this section of the portal where, again, we have some options. The account owner, let's say myself, I can create my generic account within GitHub Enterprise through a series of API calls. The person, right now, if you log into GitHub Enterprise for the first time, the account is actually created automatically for you. But for a user that can't log in, the account can't be created. So what do? We do it through the API here. We allow them to upload SSH keys for those users. A lot of our build systems connect over SSH. We need to upload and manage SSH keys. If we ever do an SSH key audit, we allow them to go in here and validate those SSH keys. And again, we have the familiar suspend, unsuspend button. Very simple interface. This one here is just creating the account. I type in the account name, a lot of heavy lifting behind the scenes. Does Todd own it? Does the account already exist? We handle that all, but it's a very, very simple 1 button. Type in the name, create the account, you're done. This is uploading SSH keys. Again, simple interface. Give your SSH key a name, or give it the username, give it the title that you want to call it, and then paste in your SSH key. The really cool thing here is that GitHub Enterprise already does the SSH key validation. So I can't upload a key that somebody else is using. So we get that for free, which is really nice. People can't share their keys or upload their keys to multiple accounts. So that's really nice. Managing generic accounts, again, so this is the actually managing of your SSH keys. Type in your generic user, click load, or retrieve SSH keys. The dialog down here on the lower left or the screen down here on the lower left will come up, and it'll show you all of your SSH keys. The little button in the upper right, you can switch from a table view to the more icon view over there on the right. So it just gives the user something, cool to be able to format their display. But here you see the machines, you see the keys, and these are already verified. Had they not been verified, there'd be a button or a toggle there that you could check to say, yes, I want to continue to use this key, continue to use it. If you don't need that key anymore, you can go ahead and delete it, all through the self-service portal. And then here's the suspend, unsuspend. So I would type in my generic account name, get the account status. As if it's active, I can suspend it. If it's not active, I can unsuspend it. So very, very simple, very easy. All right, metrics. So I've shown some screens and some things that we do to help out the users at Adobe. Now let's talk about the managers and the metrics. Everybody wants data. Why do you need this? Justify that. So let's take a look at some metrics. Some of the things that we report on. Space. That's kind of fitting here for the universe, right? Space. User growth, user locales. Where are my users coming from? Where are they using GitHub Enterprise from? And then you also have available to you today all of these site admin reports. So if you're an enterprise, you can go into the site admin, look at the reports. You can get all your users. You can get your active users, organizations, repositories. Download a CSV file. Then you can slice and dice it and put it into your favorite graphing system or do whatever you need to do with it. So that's pretty nice to have. All right, let's talk about the first one, space. So this is a graph charting our space usage. Looks like it's probably about a year and a half or so. Some of the things I'd like to point out. We have two thresholds on there. We have a 70% yellow threshold. That's your warning threshold. If you start getting up around the yellow warning, you probably want to start think about adding more space. We have the 90% threshold red line. If you get up around that or exceed that, you definitely need to be adding space immediately. You don't want to run out of disk space. Again, remember, experience, don't go there. Also on here, I put 4 major events. The first event is we were getting up around that 90% threshold. We need to do something right now. We had a terabyte. Great, dropped us back down. Users continued using the product. Space continues to grow. Why does the space continue to grow? This was I think we were on 2.16 at this time. So this growth here is attributed to forks. The second event is we did an upgrade. We upgraded to 2.25. Actually, GitHub in version 2.2.3 introduced space optimization, backend database optimization, and deduped all the forks. We saved about 1.5 terabytes of space just by getting rid of all of our forks. So big feature implementation, big win for us. Again, another shout out, thank you to GitHub for that. Appreciate it. Users started using the product, had a little blip, went over 70, came back down, probably some log rotations or something like that. Maybe some repos that were in purgatory finally got purged. Space went along, we had the opportunity, we were given some more space. Okay, we'll take it, so we added more space. Went on for quite some time, very flat kind of growth, and then we migrated to a new server. We added much more space to give us much more future growth, and then you can see now we're about at the 45% usage. I'm pretty comfortable with where we are today on our space usage. But those are the 4 major events, or the 4 major events I'd like to point out here and what we do for space, monitor and graphing and tracking our space. If you're not doing this for your organization, it probably would go a long way when you have to go request more space. It's like, well, Todd, you just came to me a week ago and wanted more space. Where's all the space going? It was like, well, guess what? I have a graph here and it shows my users are using it. I need more space. So it really goes a long way to justifying your space requests. Managers want to know adoption rate. Todd, you keep asking for more space. How many users do you have? Well, this is how many users I have. I have almost 8,000 users, and we're averaging about 160 new users per month. So, and this is only in 4.5 years. So it's widely adopted across the entire company, rapid growth, a lot of use. Managers then take that and say, okay, well, can't you graph that a little bit different way? I'd like to see it presented somewhat slightly different. Okay. So now we graph it by, in this case, locales. So these are clickable graphs that we've developed internally. Managers can drill down in and say, okay, for all the users in the US or all the users in India, give me some other information about that. Business units, what product are they working on? All sorts of other information is available than just what I'm showing you here. But it really goes a long way for our managers to be able to slice and dice that. Dashboards. If you're not building dashboards, these would be great additions to your dashboards so that people at a quick glance can see space, user growth, where are they coming from, those sorts of things. Keep that in mind. Monitoring. All right, so we've helped the users, we've helped the managers, now let's help me help myself with monitoring. I don't want to be kept up all night long, worrying about the health of my system. Some of the things that we monitor. Obviously, in your landscape, you want to monitor all the servers in your landscape. I don't monitor my stage server. It's a stage server. But certainly, you want to monitor your primary. We're, again, only in a single server setup here. If you're in a cluster, it'd be probably a little bit different. You'd want to monitor all the systems in your cluster. But I want to monitor my primary. I want to monitor my replica. Replica is really important to have. I want to monitor my backup server. If you had a DR server as well, I don't have it listed here, but if you have a DR server, you might want to monitor that, because that takes a little bit of time to build, and I'll be showing you that a little bit later on. But certainly, these are some of the important things that we want to monitor. Some of the techniques that we use for the monitoring. And a lot of this is already documented on the GitHub website, their documentation. They have a wealth of information on their website and documentation. I'd highly recommend exploring that and drilling down and looking at all that wealth of information. You'll find a whole section on just monitoring. So we use SNMP, one of the things I use multiple things. So we use SNMP as one of our things to examine system resources, load, RAM, space, you can use that. If you don't have SNMP set up or you're not familiar with it, it's simply, if you have a trusted machine, you can just SSH to your GitHub Enterprise appliance, run a DF. That would be a simple way to grab your space. If you want to just have an external monitor that just says, is my service up or down? Something really simple. Just run this simple curl command. The host name or the address of your appliance, /status. It'll just return a number. Are we up or are we down? Something really simple. Log forwarding. This is a technique that there was a new feature that just came out in a later version of Enterprise, which is really great. I can forward my logs to multiple locations. So if you're not a site admin that has privileged access to your Enterprise appliance, how do you get access to the logs? Well, we want to forward those logs somewhere. Forward them to Splunk, forward them to Logstash. That would be one way for a team that maybe does some log analysis to have access to those logs. Because now you can do multiple destinations. Maybe you have a security team, or maybe you have another team that needs the logs for whatever reason. Comma-separated list, add another address, send the logs off to their server as well. Let them slice and dice it and look it up and do whatever they need to do. But definitely get your logs off of your Enterprise appliance and put them into a long-term storage system, something that other users outside of your group would have access to look at. Your replica, what do you do to monitor your replica? JT REPL status gives you a simple output. You could go verbose, or you could go very verbose. Either way, it's going to tell you if your replica is up to date, how far behind it is, and those sorts of things. So we're monitoring our replica. Sometimes I get an alarm, hey, the replica is behind. It eventually catches up, but at least I know what's going on. Collect D. So Enterprise, if you're a site admin, you've probably already gone into the management console. You see some of the monitoring graphs. Great set of graphs. You might, again, have a team that doesn't have privileged access to get to that area. Send that information off of your Enterprise appliance to a Collect D server, and then you can graph it yourself. So that's really, really nice to have. And then out in GitHub.com, we've got Gitmon, the Git repository monitor. You might investigate that. Maybe you could take that code, tweak it around, maybe make it work for you. So those are some of the techniques. Here's that management console that I mentioned earlier. So here we have enabled SNMP, check it, and you put in your community string, production environment, stage environment, whatever. Open up any ports that need to be opened up, and then you can grab the information on that. Log forwarding, very simple interface, very clean, very nice. Check it, enable it, add the address and port number of your server, and then the protocol. We choose UDP. I think it's recommended if you're in an environment where maybe network latency is a little bit of an issue. You could go UDP or you could go TCP. If there are any network failures, I think TCP has some issues, might cause some interruptions. UDP is a send and forget it. So I go UDP, I go lowest common denominator. I don't want any impact to my enterprise appliance. Then the bottom one there is collect deforwarding. Check that, go ahead and put in your settings. All right, polling. So now I'm going to take a step back and we're going to dig down into a specific example of some things that keep me up at night, or some things that you might have experienced with your enterprise appliances, like something just happened. What just happened? Why did we get that little blip, or what just went bump? Before I jump in and dive in, I want to give a big shout out to GitHub support. They helped me a lot with these slides, specifically the commands. So if it weren't for them providing some of these commands, I've been working with them, over the years on a lot of, analysis of my system. So I've come to get a lot of commands from them. So I want a big shout out to GitHub support on that. Thank you very much. So polling. Polling is one of those things that it's easy for a user to set up a machine, and it just starts polling your system, right? So let's take a little bit of in-depth look. What we really want to do is we want to discover who's doing the polling. I want to engage them and say, hey, did you know you're polling? And then I want to educate them on a better best practice. Hey, you know what? We've got webhooks. That's the better thing to do. So the problem, polling in general is just not good. We just don't like polling. The user assumption, and I actually contacted a user on their polling activity, like, hey, Todd, I thought there were unlimited resources on the server. No, we only have one server and you're on it with 8,000 other people. What you're doing is impacting everybody else. You don't have unlimited resources. Solution is to use webhooks. So we need to find out what's going on. We need to change their behavior. And if you end up helping one person, you'll probably end up helping, it'll be a trickle-down effect. You'll end up helping everybody on your instance, because then everybody's going to feel the benefit of that. So some of the things that we're going to look at. We're going to look at a series of searches. We're going to look in 2 specific log files. I have privileged access to my enterprise appliance, so I'm going to dig right down into the log files. If you had these sent off to your Splunk system, you could probably look at them there as well. And we're also going to use the built-in sessions graph. So let's jump in. Here's this built-in sessions graph. That should probably be your first stop. GitHub has all of these great graphs that you could take a look at. This is one in particular. Now, we want to look, in the case of polling, we want to look at a week's worth of data. We want to look at something that's a little bit more meaningful. So in this case, this server looks pretty good. We have a lot of activity during the business week, and then the lull is the weekend. Little to no activity. That's great. That's what we would expect. We like to see that. This is a good server. I'd take this server. This server, on the other hand, has consistently high traffic the entire week, or requests, I'm sorry, has consistently high requests all week long. That's probably even on the weekends. So this is a pretty good indication that you have somebody out there polling, or maybe many systems polling. So first thing when you get home, check out your enterprise, your graphs. You want your server to look like this and not like that. And if it looks like that, let's dig down in and find out who's the culprit. So the first thing we want to look at is polling searches in 10-minute intervals. So here we've done a search on the BabbleD log. We have consistently high numbers, 8,000, 9,000. Okay, so we probably have some polling going on, but all of a sudden at 10,000 there's a spike. That's a pretty good indication that there's polling. Probably a build job woke up. It's the end of the day, it's lunchtime. Something just happened, started hitting the system. Is there anything to build? Is there anything to build? Is there anything to build? Probably a good indication that polling's going on when you see a spike like that, as well as consistently high numbers. Let's take a look at for the top 10 owners of repositories. So again, we're going to look in the BabbleD log. And what I find is there's this user called polling user, 96,000 requests. Probably going to look at him a little bit more in detail. We have some other high numbers, and then it kind of drops off into the teens. Now, for the users, the top 10 users doing Git operations. Hey, look, coincidence. There's our polling user at the top of the list again. 110,000 requests. We're going to have to dig down to this a little bit more detail and find out what's going on. All right, taking that user record, the 271, and then their user ID, grepping for that in the Babel log, now I can find out their per hour access rate. Very high numbers here, 6,000. At the peak, we had 111 accesses per minute, almost 2 per second. That's probably a good indication this person's polling. So now let's find the repositories that that user is polling for. So here, we've taken that user information again, looking at the Babel log, adjusting some of the search strings. Right now, we're looking for repo. We can see that they're hitting this repo called Big Repo 96,000 times. And that's their big one that they're hitting because everything else drops off after that. They're only hitting the other repos 3,000 times. So this repo is really popular for this user doing requests almost 2 per second. Now, armed with all of this information, I go and I talk to the end users. I say, okay, I found out you're doing this much polling, this is what you're hitting, and this is how often you're hitting. And a lot of the users have been, hey, Todd, that's great information, thank you, because we didn't know. We had this Jenkins box that we forgot about, somebody turned it on, and it just went crazy. We'll go turn it off. Knowing the repo that they're hitting has helped some of my users actually troubleshoot and find out where that traffic is coming from. Just asking them to say, hey, can you stop polling? Well, where am I polling from? All of this information helps you to help them, to help the health of your GitHub Enterprise appliance. Now, you can also look for the 15 most active SSH keys. That's another way to look at it. You know, we happen to use SSH access a lot. So here, this particular fingerprint is being used almost 56,000 times. So what's nice is you can take that fingerprint, go to your site admin, your search dialog, you could put that in, and then you can find the user that's associated with that fingerprint. Then you can go ask them, it's like, hey, you're hitting GitHub 56,000 times. Well, what do you do? Do you have a lot of build machines? Do you have a lot of builds on one machine? You know, start a dialogue and find out what they're trying to do, maybe help change the behavior a little bit. All right, so some other considerations. So we've looked at helping the users, we've looked at helping our managers, and we've looked at helping the site admins. So what are some of the other considerations when you're setting up or managing your GitHub Enterprise appliance? So performance. Pre-receive hooks, something new that just came out. Pre-receive hooks are great to help you enforce your business policy, but because of the way that they run on every push, you really need to make sure that they're super small, super lightweight, and run super fast. Because if not, you can start to drag down your system. And the hook itself is actually checked into a repo on your enterprise appliance, so it actually runs from the server. So you could imagine that if you're doing something heavyweight, trying to analyze a push, it's going to drag down the performance. You got to make sure this thing is super lightweight and super fast. Because most of us, if not all of us, are probably running our appliance in a VM versus like maybe the cloud. If you're on a VM, you know, are you on a shared host or are you on a dedicated host? I know most companies like to just say, you know, we have hosts out there and we're going to put you on here with who knows who, right? Try to get yourself on a dedicated host or a host with as little other customers or tenants as possible. Make sure you have the most performance. Large files. Large files is very interesting. Not only are they large files, but they can be binary files. Do you allow that people to push those to your enterprise appliance, right? Are you letting people push big files? Are you using LFS, the built-in Git LFS, large file support? Because if you just toggle the switch and say, okay, yeah, use LFS, unless you're pushing your LFS files to an external source, those files are still going to go onto your enterprise appliance for storage, going back to the point of space monitoring. So if you're going to allow people to check in mega gigabyte worth of files, and they're being stored on your appliance, you're going to have to monitor your space very, very closely. Now, what do you do about people that want to push big files? In the admin center, there's the limits. GitHub likes to recommend 100 megabytes per file and a gigabyte per repo. Right now, we don't have any controls on repo size. People can push, create branches, create revisions of files. We can check the sizes of those repos, and we can send them a nice reminder email, hey, you're exceeded a gigabyte, you're exceeded 2 gigabytes. You might want to think about slimming down. The one thing that we can control is the file size. So the default is 100 megabytes per file. If you're a little bit more generous, you can give your users a little bit more space. I would definitely recommend not going unlimited, because you never know what you're going to get. Especially if somebody pushes a really big file, it's in a repo, it's pretty much going to be there forever. People start changing that file or adding new versions of that file, the history of that file is there. So anybody that clones it is going to be cloning that entire history, all revisions of that file. It's going to be taking up a lot of space. Some things you want to think about when you're setting up your enterprise appliance is your recovery point objective and your recovery time objective. So there are two things to help you achieve those. There's high availability, and then there's also disaster recovery. GitHub's definition of HA is the replica is in the same data center, very low to no latency, probably in the rack right next to your primary instance, right? And it's used when the primary instance fails for whatever reason. A lot of various reasons for that. Unfortunately, there's only a one-to-one mapping. One primary, one replica. DR, that's something you want to think about long-term. You want to maybe have at an external site somewhere, a distant data center, some different geo, maybe a different office in a different state, maybe outside the state of California, somewhere else. The issue with this is the time it takes to build it, because it's built off of a restore mechanism. So you have to first take a backup of your primary. If that backup takes 6, 10, 12 hours, now you have to take that backup and you have to restore it over the WAN because you don't want your DR in the same data center. You want it at a distant site. Now you're going over the WAN with however much data has been backed up in 6, 10, 12 hours. By the time that restore is done, you're maybe 24 hours down the road. And now you're that farther behind. So your recovery point is going to be further behind with the DR than it is with the HA replica. But your recovery time in both scenarios is about the same. I use the replica a lot, especially if I'm setting up a brand new server. I'll set up a replica, and that thing keeps up to date. And going back to one of my previous slides, it just works. For me, it works really well. I can switch over to a replica in probably 10 to 15 minutes if I'm taking my time. You stop your primary, put it into maintenance mode, make your DNS change, spin it up, and you're good to go. So if you're not using replica today, you might want to think about it. It's really great for a HA situation in case your primary ever has a problem. Enterprise support. I'll just say that I've covered a lot of stuff today, but if you ever have any doubts about the health of your system, what was that thing that just went bump in the night? Why did we just have this spike? Contact the experts at GitHub for help. I've had nothing but excellent support from the folks at GitHub Support. Very, very talented group of folks. They've been top-notch, and again, I want to thank GitHub for that. I've been in the industry quite a while, and I've dealt with a lot of products. GitHub Support is right up there at the top, so I want to thank those guys. What I like to do is perform a periodic health check, just like going to see your doctor annually. If maybe enterprise isn't your primary job duty, right? Get a support bundle, send it into GitHub, and let the experts analyze it. They can look to see if somebody's polling. They can look to see if you have MySQL issues. They can look to see if you need to add more RAM, more CPU to your systems. They're the knowledge experts on this. So when in doubt, if you have any questions, by all means, contact the folks at support. And with that, we've got about 2 minutes left, Q&A. Well, I want to thank you. Any questions? Question? I'm sorry, what was the question? How do I deal with remote sites? I don't, so the question was, how do I deal with remote sites? Do I have a cache server? And so as I mentioned, we've got about over half of the company using GitHub Enterprise. My earlier slide was 15,000 employees. I've got about 8,000 GitHub Enterprise users. I don't have any complaints. Either we really have good network connections or the way that GitHub is architected with how they clone and having all of your repos local when you're working on them and you're only pushing the things that need to change. I've had other products in-house that we have to have a lot of fine-tuning and hand-holding to make it work really well. This thing just works for us. The folks in Europe that use it, the folks in India that use it, the folks around the world that use it, it just works really well for them. So I don't have any local caches or anything like that. I have a single server and I have a single replica, and that's all I've got. Question? The question is, how many members are on the SCM team? So our team is spread out around the country and around the world, as you can imagine. Our team has four folks. My primary focus is in GitHub Enterprise, but everybody else can jump in and do things as well. Question? The question is, did we do any customizations to our appliance? And the answer is no. I consider it, and the way that I advertise it to my internal folks is, it's a black box. Use it as is. We don't, I get on there to look through the logs, but I'm not tweaking any sys controls, I'm not tweaking this, I'm not tweaking that. We use it as is, as provided by GitHub. One, we don't want to void the warranty, right? So I don't want to break anything. It's like, oh, Todd, warranty's off because you touched this file over here. No, we just use it as is, and it works really well. What we have had to do, though, over the years is add more space, add more RAM, add more CPU, to make it work really well. But once we get those numbers, like I said earlier, we have our new server spec. That new server spec has been working really well for us, and a lot of those problems have been alleviated. So the question is, for future releases, how often do we tend to upgrade? So right now we're on 2.6.5. I know that 2.7.3 just came out not too long ago. So probably within the next month or so, we'll do that. So as soon as the release comes out, I'll put it on my stage environment. Then I'll let that bake for maybe 2, 3, maybe 4 weeks. Because I know a very brand new release like 2.7 usually has a little bit of iteration. A .1, a .2, and a .3 comes out. But then it kind of settles down. At that point, it's been about a month, maybe 2 months. We were confident that it's stable. We've been running it in our stage environment. Then I'll schedule an upgrade and go from there. Question? The question is, what kind of downtime do we have during our upgrades? That's a good question, because a lot of folks have been asking, we have an environment where we have zero downtime. We can't do upgrades. I have the luxury of being able to coordinate with all of my end users around the world and said, you know what, I need downtime on Saturday at 5 a.m. And when I do my upgrade, the upgrades right now are really fast. I think I schedule a half an hour, but I'm usually done in like less than 10 minutes. It runs really fast, maybe 15 minutes at the most. What was I going to say about that? I forget now. There was something I was going to say about upgrades. I ran a blank. I'm sorry, but that's the scheduled downtime. Maybe 1, 2 more questions, and then we're over time. But yeah, one last question. So the question is SSH key management. Do you have any requirements that your SSH keys be a certain length? No, we haven't gone down to that detail yet. People just, SSH keygen, RSA, blah, 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 go from there. They add them in. We do some periodic auditing where we'll burn all the SSH keys. Everybody's got to regenerate them, or at least they have to audit them and say, yes, I'm still using that SSH key, right? All right, last question, then we're done. Have we ever had, the question is, have we ever had to exercise our disaster recovery instance or roll back an upgrade? The answer is no. I have tested rolling between my stage environment and the replica and then flipping back and forth. I can do that really rapidly. I have tested when I upgrade to a new server, going to that new one that we just spec'd out earlier, that actually was a replica. And then when we did the cutover and say, hey, we're flipping over to the new server, I made that one the primary, and it worked. So definitely you want to test that. Test it with your stage environment. It's really fun to play with and go back and forth and make sure that your process works. So you definitely want to make sure your process works. Document it so that not only you know it, but everybody else on your team knows how to do it, and that they know how to do it well. Because you'll never know when you'll get that call at 3 a.m. on a Saturday, something just happened. And those are the things that keep us up at night. Thank you very much, and I'll be up at the front if you have any questions, and enjoy the conference.